They told you the dragon was a monster, a beast to be slain, a threat to the light, but ancient teachings say otherwise. In the deepest layers of forgotten wisdom, the sacred dragon was never a villain. It was a guardian, a symbol of divine feminine power, coiled in mystery, pulsing with creation. Not something to fear, but something to remember. Across civilizations, this creature appeared not as chaos, but as wisdom wrapped in fire, the cosmic feminine in serpentine form. It guarded the thresholds between worlds, just as the divine feminine guards the veil between life and death, spirit and matter, known and unknowable. The dragon was the womb of transformation, fierce, intuitive, creative, the very essence of power before it was rewritten. So why was it cast out? Why did ancient mythologies across the globe begin erasing this sacred symbol, twisting it into darkness? Because the return of the dragon threatens the systems built on forgetting. Because its presence reawakens what the world tried to silence: intuition, cycles, the raw magic of the feminine soul, in women and men alike. This isn't just mythology, it's a mirror. And in this video, we're going to pierce through the smoke of history, decode the ancient meanings, and reclaim the dragon as the force it always was. Not an enemy of light, but its guardian. The sacred dragon is rising, and it's calling us back to a truth buried deep beneath fear, fire, and forgotten stories. Before the stars had names and the gods had temples, the dragon was already there, coiling through the silence of the cosmos, breathing not fire, but memory. It wasn't a monster, it was a message, a living echo of creation itself, pulsing beneath the surface of all things. Not chaos in the way we've been taught to fear, but a sacred order too vast, too subtle to be seen with ordinary eyes. Those who've ever shivered for no reason, or dreamed of water and serpents, know exactly what that means. The dragon speaks not in words, but in symbols and sensations. The dragon is the womb of the world, a presence that doesn't shout but knows. It doesn't appear when we're confident or in control. It comes when we're standing on the edge of ourselves, right where the known breaks open into the mystery. Every time life pulls the ground from beneath your feet, every time the illusion crumbles and fear rises, that's the dragon arriving. Not to destroy you, but to strip away what isn't you. Because beyond the roles and routines, there's something deeper waiting to be remembered, and the dragon man is the keeper of that memory. We've been trained to fear the dark, but think about it. Where does life actually begin? A child forms in the dark. Seeds awaken in the dark. Transformation always starts in what feels like emptiness. The dragon is that sacred darkness, not punishment but preparation, a gestation. So when the unknown comes knocking, when everything comfortable starts to collapse, maybe it's not the end. Maybe it's a beginning disguised as chaos. Maybe you're being initiated back into yourself. Have you ever felt your body knowing something your mind couldn't explain? That pull in your gut, that silent knowing when logic says otherwise, that's the dragon whispering through your cells. And if you want to hear it more clearly, slow down. Step out of the noise. Through practices like deep meditation, fasting, long walks in wild places, you begin to crack the shell of modern distraction and remember the ancient pulse underneath, the pulse that never left you. Different cultures gave this force different names: chi, prana, the spiritus. But the symbol keeps showing up: spirals, serpents, labyrinths, dragons. And they don't just live in myth, they live in you. Your spine curls like a serpent. Your DNA spirals in twin serpents of code. Your energy moves in waves and coils. This is the language of the dragon, not as something external, but as the living architecture of your being. The deeper you feel, the more you remember. That's the secret most people never talk about, because it terrifies the ego but liberates the soul. So what if the chaos you've been avoiding is actually the doorway to the wisdom you've been seeking? What if the void isn't a curse, but a call? The confusion, the pain, the disorientation, they might be signs that something ancient is ready to awaken inside you. The dragon was never the villain. It was simply too vast, too wild, too true to be tamed by surface thinking. And maybe, just maybe, the ancient world knew this. Maybe that's why they left behind myths, carvings, stories, all pointing toward one thing. You didn't come here to slay the dragon. You came to become it. They say myths are mirrors. ancient reflections of truths too vast for facts alone, and among them the dragon may be the clearest reflection of all, a being that never belonged to just one land, one time, or one religion. It moves through cultures like a sacred current, shifting shape but never meaning. In ancient China, the dragon wasn't hunted, it was revered. It danced through clouds and scrolls, curled around temples, and thundered through the stories of emperors, not as a beast of doom, but as the breath of the cosmos. It united opposites, heaven and earth, masculine and feminine, stillness and movement. Where Western minds later saw a monster, the East had always seen a teacher. In Egypt, this same wisdom slithered upward in the form of Wadjet, the winged serpent of divine protection. Her image crowned the pharaoh's brow, not just as ornament, but as a symbol of awakening. She was the fire in the blood, the serpent at the spine. What modern mystics call Kundalini, the ancients embodied through her, an energy that rises when the soul is ready to remember its own throne. Wadjet didn't beg to be seen. She ignited. And in her rising, kings were crowned not just with gold, but with vision. Not just with rule, but with responsibility. Traveling further back, deeper into the primal waters, we find Tiamat, the dragoness mother of Mesopotamia. She wasn't just a goddess, she was the beginning, the womb of salt and storm, the chaos that held all order within it. They say she was slain, cut in half to form the world. But what myth forgets to mention is this: every world born from her body still carries her breath. The oceans, her memory, the blood, her rhythm. You can exile her name, bury her stories, distort her face, but you cannot erase what she birthed into being. Her story wasn't a fall, it was a sacrifice, and sacrifices echo longer than victories. Even in the forests of the Celts, where stones spoke and rivers remembered, the dragon coiled beneath the soil. They believed it moved through the earth like a pulse, through what we now call ley lines. Not fantasy, but frequency. So sacred geometry you could feel in your bones if you walked barefoot and listened long enough. The dragons of the Celts didn't burn villages. They guarded thresholds, gateways between worlds, between the seen and unseen. That knowledge still lingers in places like Glastonbury or the caves of Montserrat, where the wind itself feels like it's carrying secrets. And maybe it is. These dragons weren't all the same, yet none of them were what we've been told to fear. They weren't devils or enemies. They were the deep forces of life, untamed, intuitive, cyclical, creative, and that's what connects them across time. The wisdom of the feminine, the honoring of the invisible, the understanding that not all power needs to dominate to be real. In every one of these traditions, the dragon held the flame of sacred remembrance, a flame that didn't burn, it illuminated. So what changed? When did the dragon become the enemy? Maybe it was when the world grew afraid of the power that comes from within. When external control replaced inner knowing. When the mysteries became threats instead of thresholds. Because the dragon doesn't ask for obedience, it calls for transformation. And that's dangerous to any system that thrives on sleep. But perhaps the dragon never truly left. Perhaps it only went underground, waiting, coiled in the depths of our stories, our symbols, our cells, waiting for us to remember. And if we listen, not with our ears but with our bones, we might just hear it again. Not as a roar but as a whisper rising from within. The dragon was never just myth, it was memory, encoded in our bones, whispered through bloodlines, stitched into the dreaming of our ancestors. More than beast, more than legend, it stood as a living threshold, the silent sentinel at the edge of what can be known. And in that threshold lives the sacred feminine, ancient, intuitive, endlessly cyclic, and feared precisely because she cannot be controlled. She doesn't shout, she remembers. The dragon is not just a figure from distant stories. It's an archetype that pulses within the body. It guards not treasure, but transformation. It waits at the gates of death and rebirth, not as destroyer, but as witness. Like the feminine mysteries once embodied by priestesses and oracles, the dragon waits in stillness, in silence, in the space between. Its wisdom is not taught in books. It is felt, viscerally, subtly, deeply. In the ancient world, the feminine was revered not because she was soft, but because she was powerful. She was the womb and the storm, the dream and the blood. She held the rights of life itself, and the dragon mirrored her. It did not conquer, it contained. It did not demand, it initiated. And what the myths forgot, or perhaps were forced to forget, is that this dragon was not male. It was not masculine rage or conquest. It was the spiral force of intuition, the internal flame of knowing. Feminine not by gender but by nature. In yogic tradition they speak of kundalini, the coiled serpent sleeping at the base of your spine. That's not metaphor, it's memory. The dragon lives in your nervous system, curled like ancient fire waiting to rise. And when it does, through breath, through presence, through devotion, it does not scream. It ascends. Slowly, reverently, it moves up the inner ladder, lighting every chakra like a torch in the dark. Vision sharpens, emotions clarify. Truth no longer whispers, it sings. You don't need temples to meet this force. You don't need titles or robes. You need stillness. You need trust. The dragon moves in rhythm with the moon, not the clock. It speaks in hunger, in solitude, in creativity that strikes at 2 a.m. and doesn't care about your deadlines. It shows up when you rest instead of hustle, when you feel instead of perform, when you bleed and dream and retreat. That's not dysfunction. That's memory waking up. This force isn't linear, it spirals, it circles. It waits until you're ready to remember who you are. Not the version you were trained to be, but the truth you've always carried beneath the surface. And that's why the world forgot the dragon. That's why the sacred feminine was rewritten as weakness, chaos, or sin, because what cannot be owned must be feared, what cannot be tamed must be buried. But you can't kill what is eternal. You can only silence it for a while. The dragon is not war. It's womb. It burns, but not to destroy. It burns to refine. It sheds the skin of who you pretended to be and waits for the real you to rise. And if you've ever walked away from something with no explanation but complete peace, that was the dragon. If you felt the quiet thunder of knowing in your belly, the absolute stillness before a leap, that was her voice. It never screams. It simply knows. To awaken the dragon is to say yes to mystery, yes to rhythm, a yes to power that doesn't need permission, and yes to remembering the sacred isn't up there in the clouds. It's down here, in your breath, your blood, your instinct. Because in the end, the dragon was never the threat. It was the invitation. The sacred feminine was never the enemy. She was the map. And now she's unfolding in you. There was a time when the dragon was sacred. It stood at the threshold of the worlds, neither beast nor enemy, but a bridge. A symbol of union between matter and spirit, between the known and the unknowable. It coiled through myths not as a monster to be slain, but as a guardian of transformation, of feminine wisdom, of the deep cyclical intelligence of the earth and the body. But time has a way of distorting memory, and what was once revered became feared. Slowly, and then suddenly, the dragon was cast out of the sacred and into the shadows. It became the villain of the story, not because it changed, but because the world around it did. Patriarchal systems rose, systems that needed straight lines, clear borders, vertical hierarchies. They required obedience over instinct, dogma over direct experience, and the dragon, in all its wild, spiraling feminine power, refused to comply. So the myth was rewritten. What was once divine was relabeled dangerous. The same energy that once meant rebirth and initiation was rebranded as chaos, sin, temptation. The dragon no longer guarded gateways to higher knowledge. It now guarded piles of gold, as if its wisdom had been reduced to greed. Then came the heroes, St. George, St. Michael, shining symbols of conquest, purity, discipline. Their lances pierced not only the flesh of the dragon, but the heart of the myth itself. Look closer. These weren't simply tales of good triumphing over evil. These were stories of symbolic erasure. The dragon they conquered wasn't just a beast. It was the sacred feminine, untamed, intuitive, unpredictable, the force that cannot be reasoned with because it doesn't speak the language of control. The sword wasn't aimed at a monster, it was aimed at memory, a memory of when wisdom came from the body, when truth was found in darkness, in mystery, in the rhythm of the womb and the tides, when the sacred wasn't far above, but deep within. The fall of the dragon marked a cultural severing, from nature, from the senses, from the soul's own voice, and in its place we were given order, doctrine, chains dressed as clarity, and so began the demonization of the feminine. Lilith, the first woman who refused to bow, cast out, turned into a night demon. Mary Magdalene, once a priestess, a keeper of gnosis, a mirror to Christ's own awakening, stripped of her voice, rewritten as a prostitute, begging forgiveness. Why? Because they were fire, because they were dragon. They held the same current, sovereignty, sensuality, the power to access truth without intermediaries. The fall of the dragon wasn't just a mythic motif, it was a long, slow exile, a burial of something far deeper than story. It was the burial of the right to feel deeply, to trust instinct, to belong to oneself. What was lost wasn't merely a creature of fantasy, but the living, breathing remembrance of the divine feminine. Her symbols turned to threats, her energy labeled unholy, her voice rendered silence. And yet silence doesn't mean death. What sleeps is not gone. The dragon endures, in the ache of awakening, in dreams that refuse logic, in the fire that rises in your chest when you stand up for something you can't explain but know to be true. It stirs in the places you've been taught to ignore, the belly, the blood, the breath. It speaks in sensations, not sermons. And every time you honor what doesn't fit into a box, every time you choose intuition over approval, you feed that ancient flame. The fall of the dragon wasn't the end of a myth. It was the beginning of a forgetting. But truth has its own rhythm, and the feminine has never needed permission to rise again. The dragon never vanished. It was never slain by the sword of civilization, nor imprisoned by the myths that claimed its fall. It simply withdrew into the hidden corridors of the psyche, into the dreamscapes of our forgotten soul, into symbols misread, mistranslated, and buried beneath dogma. There, in the stillness of time, it waited, not in vengeance, but in wisdom, not to punish but to reveal. It waited for the moment when humanity, exhausted by its own illusions, would finally turn inward and ask, what did we lose when we silenced the dragon? We lost mystery. We lost reverence. We lost the part of ourselves that could not be measured, bought or controlled. We turned away from the unseen, worshipped only what could be conquered, and feared everything wild and uncontainable. The dragon, once revered in ancient myths as a guardian of treasure, a keeper of knowledge, became a monster in our stories, something to kill. And so, we began to slay parts of ourselves, the parts that felt too much, knew too much, dreamed too much. But now, the tide shifts. The return is quiet, almost imperceptible at first. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It moves like breath on the back of your neck when you're alone with your thoughts. It stirs in the silence between words, in the tremble of a soul, remembering its origin. The dragon speaks in symbols, in dreams, in synchronicities, in the subtle but undeniable sense that life is more than what we've been told. It comes to awaken what religion exiled, what culture numbed, what trauma buried. It isn't something to believe in. It's something to remember. This dragon is not the beast of fairy tales. It is the primordial force that transcends duality, both fierce and tender, both fire and water. It is the sacred feminine returning not just to women but to the collective soul, a deep intelligence that doesn't need to dominate but simply is. In women, it pulses through the reclaiming of intuition, of fierce boundaries and embodied softness. In men, it emerges through the courage to feel, to break the armor, to become present without the need to conquer. This isn't about roles, it's about integration. The dragon is the union of what we've kept separate for too long. To awaken, it is to stop running from the mirror, to sit with the ache, the rage, the longing, to stop numbing and start listening. The dragon does not fix, it reveals. It does not follow, it leads from within. And in that raw unveiling, we find the power we were told to fear, the power of being whole. This return isn't safe, it's sacred, because healing is not a process of becoming something new, but of returning to what we always were before the forgetting began. Ancient cultures understood this. They placed dragons at the thresholds of temples, in myths of transformation, at the gates of the unknown, not to warn, but to initiate. The dragon is the gatekeeper of our next becoming. It is not external. It is coded in your breath, your heartbeat, your deepest yes. Every time you choose soul over speed, silence over noise, truth over comfort, the dragon stirs. Every time you remember you are not broken, just buried, it rises. And so, this is not the climax of a legend. It is the reactivation of an ancient rhythm, a remembrance that we were never meant to live divided, from the earth, from each other, from ourselves. The dragon is not returning to the world. It is returning through us, in the tears that finally fall, in the voice that finally speaks, in the love that finally breaks open what fear tried to close. It never left. It was never gone. It was simply waiting, curled in the hidden cave of your own becoming. And now that you're ready, it breathes again. The dragon was never meant to be feared. It was meant to be felt, not as a beast in the sky, but as a presence in your own soul. In its coils are the ancient rhythms of the earth, the quiet power of intuition, the wild grace of the divine feminine, fierce, cyclical, and whole. What patriarchal myths cast into shadow, ancient wisdom preserved in symbols. And now, as collective consciousness shifts, the sacred dragon stirs again, not to conquer, but to awaken. It reminds us that true power doesn't dominate, it transforms. It doesn't burn to destroy, it burns to reveal. This is the return of the sacred within us, the healing of what was demonized, the rising of what was buried, not just in storybooks or temples, but in the everyday courage to reclaim our instincts, our sensitivity, our inner fire. So let this not be the end, but a beginning, a remembering. The dragon never left. It only waited. And now, it waits no more. To understand more about subjects related to cosmic rays, esotericism, theosophy and advanced spirituality, and access knowledge little known by the general public, access the link in the first pinned comment and discover the ebook, What Are Cosmic Rays, written by Bathajal.